What's up, YouTube? It's James here again, and this is a GOAT format deck profile of a very special deck that I created. This is a Earth Beatdown deck, more or less, that I've actually used to a decent amount of success, and I would place this really solidly as a tier 2 deck in GOAT format. I think it's only maybe slightly worse than regular warrior, but when I used it, it was very much as a metagame pick to counter warrior. And I had a decent amount of success with it. I got second at an Obelisk tournament. If I had won, then I would have gotten another Worlds invite. Um, and I also got second at a big cash tournament. Lost in the finals, unfortunately. Maybe made a few mistakes, but the deck really does crush Warrior in a very effective way, especially if they're maining a lot of cards like Dead Dust Shoots to beat Chaos Turbo. And just given that Worlds is coming up, and I might post another video or two documenting how I did there and leading up to it. I just thought it would be cool to examine this deck now that I'm more or less retiring it. But yeah, without further ado, let's go. And we're just going to start with this Warrior Core. But you'll notice that I'm playing a couple unconventional picks like these DD Assailants and the Gearfried. I think DD Assailant is a really underrated card if you're trying to combat Warrior, but you just want a kind of mid-ground card, because a lot of other decks might try to counter Warrior by, like a card like Kaiku is a really safe bet for a lot of decks to main deck because it's decent against Warrior, it's decent against Chaos, but it can be good against Warrior, it can be good against all these decks. So DD Assailant, counters any kind of their beater plan, but also it can't really be Tsukiyomi killed. They can't really block its attacks with Book of Moon the same way you would another beater because you're just going to lose value by swinging over it. So I actually think DD Assailant is or was a really strong position card in this current metagame. And in this deck, it also has the added benefit of being just a strong Earth monster, which are going to come into play in a second with the Gigantes. To round out this Warrior engine, I have triple Gearfried, and that was another reason I was interested in playing this deck. It's kind of hard to jump around and talk about, but it's kind of hard to talk about this obviously without talking about the Blast with Chains. But basically, even without Blast with Chain, I find Gearfried to be a pretty good card. Obviously, it's not ideal, more or less 1800, vanilla, but a pretty underrated factor of it is it can dodge Snatch Steal. They can't Snatch Steal it because it would just be destroyed and you would keep it. And this really does come up because I think there's a lot of situations in which, first of all, it's very easy to read if your opponent has Snatch Steal, if they've been keeping one card in hand for a while, and you can determine it's not a Chaos Monster or Tribe Infecting Virus or something like that. So it's not even an uncommon play if they have a clear field to go something like Rhoda for Gearfried, and then you're really protected quite well because you have a strong body on the board and the card in their hand is dead. I'm noticed that I'm not playing something like a Don Zalug. I really just found that this deck was the most effective when I was just like plopping as many big guys on the board as I could. And even in that situation I just gave, yeah, maybe you discard potentially the Snatch or a random card in their hand. But in this current format, there's so much Thunder Dragon, Sinister Serpent, Night Assailant. Getting a random discard, it is often quite a big risk that you're taking, especially if you're spending a powerful card like Reinforcing the Army that could get you any one of these answers on just to go for a Dawn hit, and you're not even guaranteed to hit the thing you want. Could you cut a Gearfried for a Dawn? Could you cut a Gigantes for a Dawn? Sure. It wouldn't be a bad decision, but I just kind of wanted to go like all in on one strategy with this deck. Maybe not something I usually do, but this was almost a fun deck for me that I just thought I could get to the best possible version of itself. So to a certain extent, I made some sacrifices, and I'm just like, all right, I'm just going to slam all my beaters on the board and make my opponent deal with it and not even worry about, the cards in their hand, especially if I'm making some of their cards in their hand dead anyway. I don't care about discarding those. So that was the logic behind this deck, and that was pretty much how I played it. I just used my normal summon every turn and hit for as much damage as I could, and within reason, of course. I had to play a little tactically, but I think that's really the best way to play this kind of deck. Then you have 3 Gigantes, which really contributes to that game plan because it just lets you clock them that much faster, and even if they block your normal summon with something like a Torrential, even if they have to use a Solemn Judgment in a low resource scramble situation, you can just summon the Gigantes right after and still push through. And that combined with cards like Premature and Call, it lets you can kind of pump out a bunch of damage even through back row. 3 Gigantes can definitely clog a little bit, especially if the opponent is playing multiple Kaikus. And, Deity Assailant is not always hitting the graveyard, although most people, in order to avoid its banishing effect, will try to do something like use a trap or Night Assailant or, Thousand Eyes Restrict to deal with it. So Deity Assailant ends up in the graveyard more than you think. But 3 Gigantes, I would say that maybe is the one change that I would make with this deck, because I definitely did find it to clog a little bit. But again, all in on the beat down strategy. So we're sticking with 3. And I mean, it's got 1300 defense too. They can't soak it. The effect is actually really relevant, again, in a warrior matchup. I really just optimized a lot of cards that were good there because sometimes it can even force a Solemn Judgment if you summon it and would threaten crashing into a Blade Knight and destroying all their back row. And also it gives you a little bit of immunity to something like a Snatch Steal if you have like say a Blade Knight and a Gigantes on the field. What are they really going to do? They can't snatch the blade and swing over the Gigantes because then I would get the blade back. They can't really snatch the Gigantes because then the blades can be bigger. There's a lot of ways that this deck can play around Snatch Steal, and I think that's often a card that really hurts aggro warrior decks. So Breaker, makes a lot of sense in this kind of deck. I don't think it even really needs to be explained. And Double Kaiku, the Chaos Monsters, that's definitely one way they can generate advantage without needing to beat over my big monsters. Like, they're usually unable to do that, so a Sorcerer or a BLS effect is probably one of the only ways that they're going to be able to kind of stay in the game. And Kaiku just locks that down and is a really solid beater all around, and is one of the few non-earth, non-warrior monsters I'm playing here. Then onto the spells, you have these basic staples, and yeah, this allows you to hit for a lot of damage too. Premature, again, damage. Double Rhoda just gets you what you need. Swordsman's really strong. And then Snatch, obviously. Double Smashing Ground, and I'm not playing Duo. And so, I mean, for a little while I had one Duo and Smashing Ground, and I was really just liking the Smashing Ground. Duo is fine. I would not call Duo a bad card, of course. I think that would be pretty foolish. But once again, like my Don's Luke plan, I just wanted to summon all my guys and not care. And if you draw Duo late, again, in the warrior matchup, you might end up siding it out, especially with this kind of game plan. So I just thought, hey, I'm just going to go all in, prep for warrior. It's not even that good against the Night Assailant Thunder Dragon type decks. So maybe I just don't need it at all. And, I'm fine with that. Again, just the deck is what it is and is tuned the way it's tuned. So if you wanted to build a radically different deck that could take more advantage of Duo, then that's just a different deck. The Smashing Grounds, though, I really do like in the sense that, first of all, they're able to get over Gravekeeper Spy or destroy a Gravekeeper Spy, which could definitely be a problem for this deck in certain situations. Defense mode Chaos Sorcerer, things like that. They might be more inclined to drop it in defense if they've seen these DD Assailants, because normally they wouldn't do that against a warrior deck out of fear of the Sasuke. But the Smashing Ground's also kind of an underrated ability of, even though I'm saying you just want to slam everything on the board, there's really a way that you have to sort of pace your sets and summons correctly so you don't just get blown out by a Storm or a Snatch Steal or a Chaos Sorcerer or a meta into Thousand Eyes Restrict type play. So I really like Smashing Ground in the sense that it's sort of a reactive answer, but it doesn't make you commit a card to the board. You can keep it in hand, and even when they do their big play, Snatch Steal or Heavy Storm first, drop a Chaos Monster, banish your thing, set a monster, it gives you can still be sitting on a couple cards in hand and be able to smash their monster, just summon another guy, and kind of regain board positioning and tempo. And to a certain extent, that's also why I'm not maxing on Blade Knight, although like second Blade Knight is definitely a pretty strong option that you could make. But I just found that the way I was playing it, especially with things like Gigantes becoming dead and just multiple normal summons, I just enjoyed kind of keeping cards in my hand when I could, and that would prevent Blade Knight from becoming 2000. So Smash really fulfilled a lot of nice roles, and I was kind of pleasantly surprised with how it performed because it's not usually a card that I'm kind of partial to, just kind of play style wise. Blast with Chain, this is definitely a big kind of heart and soul of the deck, and a big reason I even thought about playing it to begin with. Shout out to SDL Killa because he had a copy or maybe two copies in his in a side deck of his, just on Standard Warrior, and I think he was boarding that in the mirror. And I thought that was, I knew about the card already, but I thought that was an interesting idea, because of course the Warrior Mirror comes down to a lot of like battle advantage and trades, and even though compared to something like Sakuretsu Armor, Blast of Chain requires you to have a monster on the field, and within that attack differential, but compared to Sakuretsu, it can also be a much bigger swing, because just take, for example, if I have a Kaiku or a Assailant, whatever, and they summon a Blade Knight, make it 2k, try to swing over, I Blast with Chain. Now, not only have they taken, just, it's still a small amount of chip damage, 300 damage or whatever, but I've potentially gotten this Kaiku effect. And then what's more important is the next turn, I can swing with this 23 Kaiku, and compared to something like Sakuretsu, by the end of this whole interaction, I could have done 2,600 damage as opposed to 1,800. And, that might not seem like a big deal, but just consider that they really have to use a battle trap on that Kaiku now, or some kind of removal, because they still can't get over it the following turn. So Blast with Chain almost has an effect that, like, just the fact that it sticks around on the field sort of counts as multiple Sakuretsus in that way, and that it protects your monster for multiple turns. And then not to mention, of course, the destruction effect, which you can bait out something like a Storm, or even using your own Storm. Use a Blast with Chain, pop their face down monster. I do that play a lot. Even your own Breaker, pop a face down, and then kill their face down monster. Gigantes, I mean, honestly, I can't say the Gigantes effect, popping your own blast, really comes up that much, but it can. And of course, with Gearfried, just that's kind of what allows you to dictate the pace with this kind of deck, is just, combined with the Dust Tornadoes, and then the Blast with Chains can either be more copies of Dust Tornado or more copies of something like an Nobleman of Crossout, considering you can pop their back rows or pop their monsters, combined with Gearfried. So the ability just to like walk them for a couple turns, pop all their cards, and then you're dealing a really significant amount of damage, or just crippling them by like banishing their graveyard, is really like how I find the deck to be effective and win. And then, also just swinging for an extra little 500 points of damage can end the game. Swinging over Gravekeeper Spies, like this deck actually, if you look at it, has, it doesn't have Sasuke, which I could add, sure, but it actually has quite a few outs to Gravekeeper Spy or Roulette Barrel or any like 2000 defense monsters that can give these type of decks some trouble. In general, just I think this is a really strong card against Warriors. I mean, consider a basic play of like summon DD Assailant turn 1, you're playing around the Nobleman or Mystic Swordsman, and then you set Blast with Chain. And like, what can they actually do? I mean, they have to exile it. A lot of people really like try to trade off their weaker monster, like an 1800, like a Kaiku or Sasuke, that they think is not going to be that useful, and they just get completely blown out by Blast with Chain in that situation. So yeah, I mean, really strong card. Yeah, sure, it's a little volatile. You could cut it to 2, certain matchups, whatever, but being able to answer 1,000 as a strict is also really powerful with Gearfried. Then you have, these revivals, double Dust Tornado. Dust Tornado is just a great card in general right now, hitting the snatch. And then the rest of the trap line is pretty standard. Torrential, might not seem kind of good, but it actually is just killing a field of spies, or like summon Gigantes Torrential, and then you summon more guys. You can do all this kind of stuff. So yeah, that's the main deck. I mean, as you can see, it's just pretty well like tuned to what I want it to do. And then the side deck we can go over quickly. It's kind of just more hate for Warrior in some slots. I have these 3 Berserk Gorillas, and then the double Widespread can come in. I think I've talked about this in some decks before, but I sometimes prefer to side widespread over Sakuretsu because some people do play King Dragoon, and since you're not like the main, I think, upside that you could say Sakuretsu has over something like a widespread is that you're able to hit a Mystic Swordsman when you really need to, or a Dawn's Elude sometimes. But this deck is not really particularly weak to any of those cards anyway, so I think the widespread's a fine choice just to have some, additional answers to that kind of thing. This is how I often do against the Warrior deck, by the way, I think. Sometimes I have to like double check how I actually side. The Gigante sometimes it stays in. Also, actually, I think what I ended up doing more often is siding out one Gearfried, because actually, the powerful parts of Gearfried, as I was just describing, are being able to, pop their back rows and pop their face down monsters with Blast in those Chaos matchups. Against Warrior, you really want to use your Blast like a Sakuretsu armor, and the way I just described. Like, if I have two monsters on the field, I would rather not just pop their monster and trade my Blast for their monster. I would rather use my Blast, equip it to my monster, and they take more damage that way. So the Blast Gearfried in Warrior is still very good. I mean, it's just additional Sakuretsus or whatever, but I almost prefer doing the other thing. Zing also can come in. You could take out a Revival, or you could take out the Gigantes, like I was describing. You could take out the Kaiku, depending on how many Chaos monsters you run. They run. And then, where was I on the side? The Wombats are obviously for burn. The Wanghus are for chaos control. And I mean, if they're playing a Decree version, that can be kind of scary. I often side out Call in that situation. And usually I'll slim down on... these guys want to go back in. And I'll slim down on the copies of Assailant and Gigantes, because like as good as they are as strong normal summons, like you can just get walled out by 1,000 Eyes and not generate any advantage that way. And then finally against Turbo, which I probably do consider this deck's worst matchup, and then the kind of new versions of Turbo with Solemns and Jar of Greeds, I think this deck does have a pretty tough time with, and that's what I've lost to in various tournaments and stuff. So that is definitely a part of the reason that I'm considering not using this deck so much anymore. But I mean, it can totally beat those decks. It's just, you kind of just want to do your thing. You know what I mean? Like, you kind of just want to draw your curve of removal and big guys to summon. And if you get that successfully, there's really not a lot any deck can do, and it can feel very unfair, and matches are over in like 5 minutes. But anyway, that is my Earth Beatdown deck, and it's not a flex or anything, but this is just kind of what I like about Yu-Gi-Oh! In general. I find it just taking this deck that people have obviously played Earth decks before, people have played Gearfried decks before. I don't think a lot of people have combined them before in this type of way. But just taking a deck that a lot of people aren't thinking of as super top tier, making your best possible version of it, and taking it to some tournaments and actually doing pretty well. I wish I had gotten the dub on a few of those occasions, but regardless, I had a lot of success on ladder using this deck, and I just found it a lot of fun. So to anyone that says GOAT format is stale, all these cookie cutter things, maybe I agree. I still like Edison better, but there's still a lot of stuff to be explored, and there's even a wider field of niche decks like this that you could really optimize or create your own version of in Edison format, of course. So with that being said, that's going to close it out for today. Like, comment, subscribe, and stay tuned for Worlds, and I might have another video for you before then. I don't want to give away too much of the secret sauce, but I hope you guys enjoyed this deck. Peace.